Quick, name the first king of England. William the Conqueror? Alfred the Great? Wrong on both counts. The actual first king of all England was Athelstan, who ruled from 927 to 939 AD. He conquered the last independent Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, defeated a massive Viking-Scottish alliance at the Battle of Brunanburh, and united England for the first time in history. Medieval chroniclers called him King of all Britain. European rulers treated him as an equal. He was more powerful than any English king before him and arguably more successful than many after. So why has almost nobody heard of him? This is the story of Athelstan, the forgotten king who created England and then vanished from popular memory. Athelstan was born around 894 AD, the eldest son of Edward the Elder and grandson of Alfred the Great. His birth was both fortunate and complicated. His mother, Ecgwin, was probably Edward's first wife, but her status was disputed. Some sources suggest she was a concubine rather than a legal wife. This matters because it affected Athelstan's legitimacy. Medieval succession was complicated enough without questions about whether your parents were properly married. Athelstan grew up knowing his claim to the throne was potentially vulnerable. He was raised partly by his aunt Ethelflaed, Lady of the Mercians, a remarkable woman who ruled Mercia after her husband's death and was a formidable military leader in her own right. From her, Athelstan learned strategy, governance, and the reality that power required both military strength and political skill. To understand what Athelstan achieved, you need to understand what England looked like in 927. There was no England. There were Wessex, the southern kingdom, Alfred the Great's domain, the strongest Anglo-Saxon kingdom. Mercia, central England, allied with Wessex but semi-independent. East Anglia, conquered by Alfred's descendants but recently so. Northumbria, the north, sometimes ruled by Anglo-Saxons, sometimes by Vikings, politically unstable. Viking-controlled territories, the Danelaw in eastern England, still partially independent. Wales, multiple Welsh kingdoms, independent and hostile. Scotland, independent kingdom of Alba under its own kings. Viking Dublin, Irish Norse kingdom that controlled parts of northern Britain. The island of Britain was a patchwork of competing kingdoms, dynasties, and ethnic groups, Anglo-Saxons, Vikings, Britons, Scots, Irish Norse, all fighting for dominance or survival. Athelstan's father, Edward the Elder, r. 899 to 924, had spent his reign expanding Wessex control. He conquered the Danelaw systematically, building fortified towns, burhs, and establishing English authority over formerly Viking territories. By Edward's death in 924, most of southern and central England was under West Saxon control. But Northumbria remained independent, Wales was hostile, and Scotland was a rival power. England as a unified kingdom didn't exist yet. When Edward died in 924, succession was contested. Athelstan was the eldest son but faced opposition from his half-brother Aelfweard and potentially from nobles who questioned his mother's status. Aelfweard died within weeks of Edward, possibly murdered, possibly natural causes, conveniently for Athelstan. This removed one rival but left suspicions. Some nobles supported Athelstan's younger half-brother Edwin instead. Athelstan secured Wessex first, then Mercia. By 925, he was generally recognized as king, but it wasn't smooth or automatic. He'd had to fight politically, possibly eliminate rivals, and build support among powerful nobles. This contentious start shaped Athelstan's rule. He knew he had to prove himself through achievement, not just inheritance. The turning point came in 927. The Viking king of York, Northumbria, died, and Athelstan saw an opportunity. He marched north with an army and seized York without major battle. This wasn't just another conquest. Northumbria was the last independent Anglo-Saxon kingdom. By taking it, Athelstan could claim to rule all of England, not just Wessex or the English, but England as a geographic and political entity. At Emont Bridge in July 927, Athelstan received submission from Constantine II, King of Scotland; Owain, King of Strathclyde; Hueldada, King of Deheubarth, Wales; Ealdred of Bamburgh, Northumbrian noble; This meeting was revolutionary. Athelstan wasn't just another regional king, he was claiming overlordship of all Britain. The other rulers recognized him as superior, at least temporarily. From 927 onward, Athelstan styled himself King of the English or even King of all Britain. This was unprecedented. Previous rulers had been King of Wessex or King of the Anglo-Saxons. Athelstan was claiming something new, unified English kingship. Athelstan didn't stop at England. He invaded Wales in 927 to 928, forcing Welsh kings into submission. He imposed harsh terms. Annual tribute, gold, silver, cattle, hunting dogs. Welsh kings to attend his court. Fixed borders that favoured England. Welsh military support when demanded. One Welsh chronicle bitterly records that Athelstan had subdued Wales. Welsh independence was curtailed, though Wales remained technically separate kingdoms under English overlordship. Athelstan also took hostages, sons of Welsh kings held at the English court to ensure good behaviour. This was standard medieval practice but effective. Welsh rebellion was risky when your heir was Athelstan's prisoner. Scotland was more difficult. Constantine II had submitted in 927 but was only buying time. Scotland was strong, independent, and resented English claims of overlordship. Athelstan invaded Scotland in 934 with a massive combined army and navy. He marched as far as Dunatar in northeastern Scotland, deeper than any English army had gone before. The invasion was devastating but not decisive. Constantine couldn't defeat Athelstan but also wouldn't submit permanently. This unfinished business would explode in 937. Military conquest was only part of creating England. Athelstan also built administrative and legal unity. He issued law codes that applied across England, standardizing legal practices. He reformed coinage, making it uniform across his kingdom. He established royal authority through appointed officials rather than semi-independent regional rulers. He held regular councils, wittens, where nobles from across England gathered, creating a unified political class that owed loyalty to him rather than to regional kingdoms. He also promoted Christianity as a unifying force, supporting monasteries, collecting relics, and presenting himself as a Christian king uniting Christian peoples against pagan Vikings. These administrative reforms sound boring but were crucial. They transformed England from a collection of recently conquered territories into something resembling an actual unified kingdom. By 937, Athelstan's dominance had created enemies. A massive coalition formed against him. Constantine II of Scotland resented English overlordship. Olaf Guthfrithson, Viking king of Dublin, wanted to reclaim York. Owain of Strathclyde, Briton king allied with Constantine. Possibly Welsh contingents, though evidence is unclear. This was the most dangerous military threat Athelstan faced. The coalition army was huge, probably 10,000 to 20,000 men, which was massive by 10th century standards. Their goal was to destroy Athelstan's power, reconquer Northumbria for Viking rule, and end English dominance of Britain. If they succeeded, England as Athelstan had created it would cease to exist. Somewhere in northern England, the exact location is still debated, Athelstan met the coalition army in battle. The date was probably autumn 937. The battle was apocalyptic by contemporary standards. The Anglo-Saxon chronicle calls it the greatest battle fought in Britain since the Anglo-Saxons invaded in the 5th century. An Old English poem describes it in vivid, brutal detail. Athelstan's army included West Saxon forces from southern England, Mercian contingents from central England, whatever Northumbrian support he could gather, possibly some Welsh allies forced to fight for him. The battle lasted all day. Both sides fought desperately. Casualties were enormous. The Old English poem The Battle of Brunanburh describes the carnage in terms unusual for medieval poetry. 5 young kings lay dead on that battlefield, put to sleep by swords, and also 7 of Olaf's jarls, and a countless number of seamen and Scots. The field grew dark with the blood of warriors. Never before in this island, as books tell us and our ancient historians say, was a greater slaughter made by the sword. The coalition army was destroyed. Constantine's son was killed. Multiple kings and jarls died. The survivors fled, Constantine back to Scotland, Olaf back to Dublin. Athelstan had won decisively. The threat to English unity was eliminated. No power in Britain could challenge him militarily after Brunanburh. Brunanburh secured everything Athelstan had built. After 937, England's unity was secure. Viking threats to reconquer northern England ended. Scottish and Welsh challenges to English power failed. Athelstan's kingship was unchallengeable. Medieval chroniclers recognized Brunanburh's importance. They called it the greatest battle in living memory. They portrayed Athelstan as a heroic warrior king defending Christian civilization against pagan Vikings and hostile neighbors. Modern historians argue about whether Brunanburh really was as significant as sources claim, but the contemporary view is clear: this was the battle that made England permanent. After Brunanburh, Athelstan held a great council at Buckingham where nobles from across England attended. He issued laws. He granted land. He collected tribute. He demonstrated that he was the undisputed king of a unified realm. He also engaged in extensive diplomatic activity, receiving embassies from continental rulers, marrying his sisters to European kings, and presenting himself as a major European power, not just an island king but a significant player in European politics. Athelstan was arguably the most powerful ruler in Western Europe in the late 930s. Consider the competition. France, weak Carolingian kings with little real power. Germany, Otto I was still consolidating power, he'd later become Holy Roman Emperor. Italy, politically fragmented. Spain, divided between Christian and Muslim kingdoms. Athelstan's unified England, recent military victories, and administrative competence made him a serious European power. He married his sisters too. Otto I of Germany, later Holy Roman Emperor. Hugh the Great of France, effective ruler though not king. Louis IV of France, Hugh's successor. These weren't minor alliances. Athelstan was marrying into the top tier of European royalty. He was considered their equal. On October 27, 939, Athelstan died at Gloucester, probably around age 45. He'd reigned for 15 years since securing power, 12 years as undisputed King of England. He never married. He never had legitimate children. We don't know why, perhaps political calculation, avoiding creating rival family factions, perhaps religious devotion, he was deeply pious, perhaps personal preference, perhaps infertility or health issues. His death without an heir meant his life's work immediately became vulnerable. His half-brother Edmund succeeded him. Edmund was capable but young, about 18, and untested. Within a year, Olaf Guthfrithson, who'd survived Brunanburh, re-invaded England and retook York. The unity Athelstan had built immediately faced challenges. Edmund eventually restored English control of the north, but the pattern was set: Athelstan's achievements were vulnerable without him. His successors, Edmund, Edred, Eadwig, Edgar, spent decades reconsolidating power. While England remained theoretically unified, Athelstan's model of strong centralized kingship weakened. Because Athelstan had no children, there was no Athelstan dynasty to preserve his memory. His half-brothers and nephews succeeded him, but they had their own agendas and legacies to build. The bigger reason Athelstan is forgotten is 1066. When William the Conqueror invaded England, he created a radical break in English history. Norman historians had little interest in Anglo-Saxon kings. They wanted to legitimize Norman rule, which meant emphasizing that Anglo-Saxon England was weak, divided, and needed Norman conquest to civilize it. Athelstan's story of an Anglo-Saxon king who unified England, defeated massive coalitions, and ruled effectively, didn't fit the Norman narrative. So he was downplayed or ignored. Later English historians, writing after the Norman conquest, relied heavily on Norman sources and perspectives. The Anglo-Saxon period became a prologue to real English history, which supposedly started with William. Even among Anglo-Saxon kings, Athelstan is overshadowed by his grandfather, Alfred the Great. Alfred has a better story for popular memory. Burned the cakes, a legendary, probably false, but memorable. Saved Wessex from Viking conquest when all seemed lost. Learned to read Latin as an adult. Combined warrior king with scholar king image. Died defending Christian England from pagans. Alfred's myth is powerful and appealing. He's the underdog who saved England. Athelstan's achievement, consolidating what Alfred started and actually creating unified England, is more bureaucratic and less dramatically appealing. He wasn't saving England from destruction, he was building administrative unity, which is impressive but less exciting. We have relatively few sources about Athelstan compared to later medieval kings. The Anglo-Saxon chronicle mentions him but isn't detailed. We have some charters, land grants, some laws, and a few chronicles written later. This makes Athelstan harder to dramatize. We know what he achieved but less about his personality, his motivations, his private life. He's historically significant but personally opaque. Compare this to someone like Richard the Lionheart, about whom we have extensive chroniclers describing his character, his crusades, his adventures. Richard is easy to make into a character. Athelstan is harder. England has no strong cultural memory of Athelstan. He appears in no major literature, inspired no legends, has no monuments to his achievements. The Battle of Brunanburh, which contemporaries thought was the most important battle in centuries, is barely known today. There's no annual commemoration, no battlefield site people visit, no cultural memory. Compare this to Battle of Hastings, everyone knows it, the site is a tourist destination. Battle of Agincourt, Shakespeare wrote about it, cultural memory is strong. Battle of Waterloo, massive cultural impact, remembered across Europe. Brunanburh, possibly as significant as any of these, is forgotten except by specialists. In recent decades, historians have been rehabilitating Athelstan's reputation. Scholars recognize his achievements. First true king of England. Military success at Brunanburh. Administrative innovations. European diplomatic significance. Patron of learning and the church. But this academic recognition hasn't translated into popular awareness. Ask average Britons to name early English kings, and they'll mention Alfred, William the Conqueror, maybe Henry VIII. Athelstan remains obscure. Ironically, King Arthur, who probably never existed, is infinitely more famous than Athelstan, who definitely did exist and actually unified Britain. Arthur is mythical, which makes him flexible. He can be whatever each generation needs: chivalric ideal, Celtic hero, tragic figure. His story has drama, romance, betrayal, and magic. Athelstan is historical, which constrains him. He did specific things at specific times for documentable reasons. He's impressive but not mythical. Britain remembers a king who probably never existed and forgets the king who actually created England. Before Athelstan, England was aspirational, a collection of Anglo-Saxon kingdoms that sometimes cooperated. After Athelstan, England was a reality, a unified kingdom with single monarchy, unified legal system, common coinage, centralized administration, recognized borders, international diplomatic recognition. This is nation-building in a real sense. Athelstan didn't just conquer territory, he created institutions and identity. Athelstan proved that unified English military power could defeat any rival in Britain. Brunanburh demonstrated that coordinated English forces, drawing on Wessex, Mercia, and Northumbria, were formidable. This military unity became the foundation for his successor's power. English kings after Athelstan could mobilize resources from across England, not just their home region. Athelstan's administrative innovations, unified law codes, standardized coinage, centralized governance, became the model for later English kingship. His law codes, issued around 930, show sophisticated thinking about governance, standardizing weights and measures, regulating trade, establishing legal procedures, defining royal authority. These weren't perfect or fully implemented everywhere, but they established principles that later kings built on. Athelstan was a patron of learning and the church. He collected relics obsessively, his collection was one of the finest in Europe. He supported monasteries, commissioned manuscripts, and promoted learning. He saw himself as a Christian king with responsibility to support the church. This wasn't just piety, it was political. The church provided literate administrators, ideological legitimacy, and connection to European Christian civilization. Continental rulers treated Athelstan as an equal or near equal. His sister's marriages to top European royalty indicate his prestige. Embassies came to his court from across Europe. This international recognition of English power was new. Previous Anglo-Saxon kings were regional players. Athelstan was a European power. Counterfactuals are speculative, but consider, without Athelstan's unification, England might have remained divided. Northumbria might have stayed independent or reverted to Viking control. Scotland might have expanded south. Welsh kingdoms might have remained stronger. The political geography of Britain could have developed very differently. Athelstan's achievement was creating the fact of English unity early enough that it became difficult to undo. Later challenges to English unity, Viking raids, Norman conquest, Scottish wars, happened to an already unified England, not to a collection of competing kingdoms. In 927 AD, there was no England. There were Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, Viking territories, Welsh principalities, and Scottish rivals all competing for control of Britain. Athelstan conquered the last independent Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, defeated a massive coalition of Vikings and Scots at Brunanburh, forced Welsh and Scottish kings to accept his overlordship, and created unified English kingship for the first time. Medieval chroniclers called him the greatest king since Alfred. European rulers treated him as a major power. He married his sisters to future emperors and kings. For 15 years, he ruled a united England that was the strongest kingdom in Western Europe. Then he died without an heir. The Normans conquered England 127 years later and erased Anglo-Saxon memory, and Athelstan vanished from popular history. Today, almost nobody knows who he was. He has no monuments, no legends, no cultural memory. The first king of England is forgotten while later, less successful kings are famous. This is partly because he died without children to preserve his memory, partly because the Norman conquest created a historical break, partly because his grandfather Alfred has a better story, and partly because successful administration is less exciting than dramatic survival against odds. But the historical reality is clear: Athelstan made England. Not Alfred, who saved Wessex but didn't unify the island. Not William the Conqueror, who conquered an already unified England. Athelstan. In 926, England didn't exist as a unified kingdom. By 937, after Brunanburh, it did. That's Athelstan's achievement. He should be remembered as one of the most important kings in British history. Instead, he's a footnote known mainly to specialists. History remembers the dramatic and the mythical. It forgets the competent and the administrative. Athelstan was competent, successful, and effective. And for that, ironically, he's been forgotten. The man who made England is unknown to the English. That's history's loss. Had you heard of Athelstan before this video? Let me know in the comments.